Hello and welcome to the Sports Pro podcast. Now, before we start the show, I just wanted to give you a little nudge to talk about our sister podcast. That is Streamtime Sports. It features my colleague Chris Stone and Sports Pro CEO Nick Meacham, and it's published weekly, covering all of the latest news and developments in the sports media space, with a special focus on the people, businesses and technologies driving the sports streaming revolution. It comes out every Wednesday and is the go-to place for broadcast professionals. Streamtime Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
All stories should come with an Everton twist, I think.
Hello, welcome to the latest edition of the Sports Pro podcast. We're back in Sports Pro HQ this week after a little field trip over to the London Stadium for Sports Pro AI, which was a wonderful success. Hopefully everyone that came enjoyed it, and if you didn't, well, we'll have another one, so don't worry about it too much. We're back at it this week in terms of our regularly scheduled programming, and to take us through it, I have a couple of my editorial colleagues. Hello, Sam Carp.
Hey Tom, how you doing? How was your personal field trip to Ibiza?
Well, my personal field trip to Ibiza, you've given away the game. That's a podcast for another week. I was lucky enough to go to Ibiza and go to the T100 triathlon series event there. We're going to be producing a little special podcast around that, which will come out in a few weeks' time. So you'll hear all about my trip to Ibiza, listeners, on that one there. Ed Dixon, you've not been to Ibiza. You were not at Sports Pro AI. How's life on the sunny south coast?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here, Tom. But yeah, hoping for a call up next year.
It's good to get out of the house.
It's good to shower and everything.
Yeah, it's good to see you out of the house, Ed. You know, the cave, as I like to think of it, that you live in, the cricket cave.
It's also a podcast for another time.
Yeah, the end of year awards podcast maybe. Right, this week we've got a couple of things on the agenda. Firstly, there's a little bit of news, and secondly, we're going to be hearing an interview by one of my special guests in this week's pod, Sam Carp. Sam, who did you talk to?
Spoke to the BodyArmor Chief Marketing Officer, Tom Gargiulo.
It's a little bit NHL themed, I guess, as BodyArmor being a sponsor. We're going to talk a little bit about NHL later in this episode. But before we get to the NHL, which starts later this week, we're going to talk about a couple of news items that have been knocking around the industry this week. The first being everyone's favourite new football tournament, the Club World Cup. Ed, what's the latest on the Club World Cup?
Yeah, well, FIFA has finally named which 12 stadiums are going to stage it. So we know it's going to run from the 15th of June to the 13th of July next year. It's going to feature 32 teams. The final's going to be at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. At the interest of time, I probably won't rattle off all the other 12 stadiums, but the majority are in the East Coast. And it's kind of the biggest update we've had in the Club World Cup for a while, because this is Gianni Infantino's big undertaking. This is his big legacy project. And yet we're about 250 odd days away from kickoff, and there's still so much we don't know. We don't know who the media rights partner is. The sponsorship agreements are pending, and because of that, it means the monetary value for the clubs who are going to be competing, there's still a giant question mark over that. And of course, the tournament's arriving amid lawsuits, criticism from clubs, domestic leagues and players. So there is a lot we don't know, and at the moment, the lack of enthusiasm from players, leagues and commercial partners, it's hardly conducive to a successful tournament as things stand.
A lot to go through there. Let's start with the venues. I mean, as you said, Ed, listing stadium names is not the most interesting thing to do, but
It hasn't stopped me.
But the one thing that I found slightly nerdily interesting as someone who keeps an eye on this kind of thing is that, unlike most FIFA tournaments, stadium sponsor names were kept in the official FIFA press release. This is unusual because usually for a FIFA tournament, anyone that is not a FIFA sponsor, their branding is stripped back, not permitted. For example, at the 2018 Russia World Cup, the Lukoil Stadium was just known as the Spartak Stadium, I think, because there was a clash in sponsor with one of the other tournament partners. But for this one, all of the sponsors for the stadiums have kept their name. So I'm talking about Audi Field in DC.
Mercedes-Benz Stadium was listed for the 2026 World Cup as Atlanta Stadium.
There you go. Perfect.
For example.
Thank you, Ed. Sam, you write a sponsorship newsletter. What do you think this says about where FIFA's at with their partners for this tournament?
I think, it's probably like a few things you could read into that specific detail. One is that obviously FIFA doesn't yet have any sponsors for this tournament, so there was no issue, I guess, in terms of exclusivity and that kind of thing. The knock-on impact of that is when FIFA is trying to secure sponsors now, what impact does that have in terms of the categories that it's able to get? Because, yeah, as you say, if they do want to try and get a automotive sponsor,
Well, they've already got 2 stadium sponsors. Yeah.
Audi and Mercedes-Benz, as you've just said. If they want to try and get, I don't know, financial services sponsor, you've got Lincoln Financial Field in there. So those are kind of some potential issues further down the line. I guess there's also the question of, what sort of precedent does this set? Obviously, as we mentioned, 2026, they've already announced sponsorless venues for that one. But if you kind of start to let this happen now, you're opening a can of worms where further down the line, future host venues are asking for similar things. From what I've been reading as well, it sounded like one of the sort of sticking points that led to the delay of announcing the venues was kind of how revenue was going to be split between the host city, between FIFA, between the venues themselves, which was actually one of the things that was reported for the delay of the 2026 venues being announced also. So I don't know, maybe this is kind of like a little bit of a concession that FIFA had to make in that sense. And that obviously if these venues being used for the Club World Cup can keep their original name, then there's probably additional value that they're going to be able to derive from their sponsors. So yeah, there's probably a few things going on there from a sponsorship perspective, but it's as you kind of pointed out and spotted, it's a pretty big departure from how FIFA usually operates.
And Ed, I mean, if they're sort of not able to provide clean stadia for their sponsors, as it were, it probably says that they're struggling to bring in tournament partners, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. We still don't really know what the role of their existing global partners is as well, either those existing FIFA partners, because there's been no announcement around whether those existing deals are going to carry over into the Club World Cup. But I guess, this is Genesis, this expanded Club World Cup. This first edition is going to be, it's going to be kind of feeling itself out, I think, and it's going to have to endure. And it's like anything, I think Infantino, his commitment to this hasn't waned despite all the opposition. So I think irrespective of the lukewarm commercial interest so far, the lack of appetite and criticism generally from domestic leagues, I think Infantino is quite comfortable riding out the storm in that regard and then look to build going forward. I think another aside to all this as well is kind of, there's a lot of mystery around the Men's Club World Cup. We still really don't know what on earth is going on with the women's event. Like, no details have been announced for that competition that I can find. And they said it was going to be staged in January 2026 for 16 teams, but we don't even know what the host country remains. We don't even know where the host country is either. So that's another thing that I think FIFA is going to have to address quite quickly as well. And considering the pushback it's had on the Men's Club World Cup, I think it's got a lot of, that in tray is going to be mounting.
Yeah, probably a bit preoccupied with that 2025 one first. But I think it's an interesting point you made about the role of like FIFA's global partners in all this, because FIFA like revamped its commercial structure a few years ago, and it kind of had that new top FIFA partner category, which basically was supposed to encompass all FIFA properties basically. So I'd imagine that the partners within that category, I think you've got like Adidas, Coca-Cola, for example, they're probably all making the point like, well, we've signed this deal that covers all of your properties. Why aren't we automatically sponsors of this new event? Whereas I was reading in, I think it was The Athletic, they were reporting that FIFA basically believes that the value of this competition is such that it should be able to stand up on its own. It should have its own sponsorship deals that are kind of unbundled from that broader package that it sells. So that's probably another part of the reason why we're seeing that delay. I feel like the sort of outcome that feels most likely at the moment, given those concessions that they've made to the stadium sponsors and the impact that has on sort of category exclusivity, is that they are going to kind of have to try and find a way of hashing out some sort of compromise with those existing partners and deriving some, additional value out of those deals, which, again, might also involve some concessions, and that they're probably not going to hit the targets that they initially set.
I think not going to hit the targets they originally set is a very generous way.
They wanted $4 billion, didn't they, from television revenue?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other point. No, there's no TV deal attached to this. There's been an emergency call by Gianni Infantino held with broadcasters. We're less than 12 months away. There's no sponsors. There's no movement on the women's version of this tournament. And shock surprise, FIFA doesn't really seem to be doing a very good job. If that sounds cynical, that's because it is. This is really a tournament, and let's be frank about it, and no one wants. Players don't want it. The fans may want it when they come around. Fans generally tend to want to watch football. But it's clear broadcasters aren't really very interested. Sponsors are either uninterested or expecting it to be already part of their deals that they have already. And it's not just the players either. You're hearing leagues organisation, the Premier League, FIFA Pro, the Players Union, talk about how this is just a tournament too far. Ironically, all happening at a time when Roger, who's probably been the most outspoken individual on this, the Manchester City midfielder, just picked up a season-ending injury. I mean, an ACL is one of those things that it can happen at any time, but it does generally tend to happen when you're putting more and wear and tear on a player. So it's not been a great PR week, I wouldn't say, for FIFA, despite the fact they're able to launch their brand for this tournament at a glitzy event in New York, where they also announced that the same producers of that event are going to be doing a halftime show for the FIFA. Is it the FIFA World Cup final or the Club World Cup final?
Club World Cup's going to have a halftime show.
Lovely. We'll see. We'll get to see what they do with that.
We're coming at this from a very Eurocentric viewpoint, where we have the Champions League, we've got the biggest league, domestic leagues in the world. Infantino, I guess he has a lot of support outside of Europe, from your Africas, your Asias. Obviously, I'm not trying to insinuate anything, but is it going to be more beneficial? Are we looking at this too narrow-minded through a European scope? Is it not worth considering the benefits for the clubs in Africa, Asia, Central and North America going to be getting out of this?
Maybe. I think the other thing to say on that, though, is that probably the one club from Asia that FIFA would have wanted at this tournament isn't going to be there, Al Nassr. And they're going to have to find a way to get Lionel Messi in there as well, because they haven't figured out that part of it yet. North American qualification is still up in the air to some degree. So yeah, Club World Cup. The skinny on it is that it's there's an update, but there's still very much there's still a lot that we don't know. On a thing that we know maybe slightly more about this week than we did a couple of weeks ago, Ed, is Super League Basketball. Now, Super League Basketball replaces what was the British Basketball League. It's a domestic competition. You've been across this quite a lot. Can you talk us through the kind of the whole story? There's a Everton related twist in here too, isn't there?
All stories should come with an Everton twist, I think. Yeah, so the British Basketball League, I think it would have been back end of 2021. They got a £7 million investment from 77 partners. There's the Everton link. And that saw them take a 45% stake in the BBL. We then saw what happened with 777, various lawsuits, financial difficulties, Everton takeover fell through. So it meant the BBL's operating company, Basketball League Limited, had its license terminated. That was concerns over its financial position, obviously linked to 777. It looked like it left a lot of clubs on the brink as well. So it looked as though there wouldn't be a lot of clubs that wouldn't be able to play in a league, never mind there being a league itself. So in the end, I guess a sort of basketball cooperative was formed. So a group of clubs that now make up the Super League Basketball, they formed a consortium. It's called Premier Basketball Limited. They've got a 3-year interim license to run the league. And it tipped off on the 27th September. So I think this is interesting for a number of reasons, just from a sort of a cautionary investment tale, if you like. Because the BBL, I think when they signed that deal with 777, it was sort of described as transformative for British basketball, and that take is sort of aged like milk, really. But the deal was welcomed at the time, but it actually highlighted the risk of a model where the focus is on investment at the league level rather than with individual clubs. So what Super League Basketball is doing is it's concentrating investment purely on the clubs rather than at the league level. So I think the days of a 777 or any other investment firm coming in and investing purely in the league and putting too much at stake, I think that is just not on the agenda at all. So this Super League Basketball, it is still the new name and a completely new approach. It's kind of the antithesis of what the BBL was doing, really.
I mean, you say it didn't work, or it wasn't working. The investment was good for British basketball. It was especially good for the London Lions, who were one of the teams, I guess, that got individual backing. They played their first Euro Cup season in 2022, and last season they got to the semi-finals of that competition, which is like a first for British basketball. So, it was making progress. It seemed to me, and Sam, I don't know if this was your reading as well, that the collapse of 777 partners had bigger impact on the sort of progress that was being made rather than sort of having made no progress whatsoever.
Yeah, I think to be fair, the money addressed a need in that basketball in the UK has always been massively underinvested in. So lo and behold, when someone did start putting some money into it, things started to improve. I guess the issue wasn't so much the investment itself, it was more the source of the investment. And it started to unravel basically when 777 couldn't fulfill its payments, which is ultimately what led to, as Ed mentioned, that license being terminated. So yeah, I think there was kind of a little bit of momentum building behind it. It was although slightly weird, in that you had the company who owned the biggest team in the league also owning a 45% stake in the competition. Like, that doesn't really happen in most healthy, competitive professional sports competitions. So that was perhaps another issue. But in terms of, I guess, things like broadcast, sponsorship, that seemed to be ticking along relatively nicely. Ultimately, we're not really know how that would have played out. But I think the thing like that Super League basketball has to get right now is just focus on maintaining sustainable professional league, which there hasn't really been in the UK for quite a long time. And some of that's down to bad luck. Like, there was once upon a time when there was like a bidding war for basketball rights in this country, and NTL outbid Sky for a 10-year deal. I think it was like £22 million, and then NTL went bust. So there's kind of an element of bad luck to that, and that who knows what would have happened if that deal had survived. But yeah, I think when 777 came in as well, they were talking about all the things they were going to solve in the sport, you know, not just at the top level, all the way down to the grassroots. And it's kind of, I think the thing that this new competition needs to focus on is just worrying about creating an elite competition. There needs to be sort of investment throughout the sport to address those wider kind of grassroots issues that have pervaded for quite a long time. Yeah, basketball in the UK has been the fastest growing sport for about 20 years. And at some point that rings untrue. Well, yeah, but I think we could sit here and talk for ages about that.
That's a lot of potential.
It's not the sport's fault that it has a high participation base, but those who decide where the funding goes don't believe that it's going to win an Olympic medal. That's kind of a lot of the reason that it hasn't received some funding. It kind of goes down to things like, we could get into things like social inequalities and all that kind of stuff, but that's probably for another pod. I would say as well, like Super League basketball with this new approach, it wouldn't have essentially done a 180 if, from an operational standpoint, it was working. Like, when I spoke to Vaughan Millett, who is the interim chair, he said, like, we had no choice but to start from scratch because it was being run entirely unsustainably. So yeah, it goes back to your point where the investment itself wasn't necessarily the problem. It's just what they were doing with it. Not even necessarily where it was going, but the fact that it ran out. Like, if it was able to be maintained for a period of time to the point where you got it to being a sustainable league. Maybe that was never the case here, but we don't know because the 777 money ran out. And we're left in a position where British elite basketball is starting all over again. I think it does at least there are some green shoots. There's a new rights deal with DAZN, for example, which provides decent exposure on that platform, and pretty ease of access for fans that want to find it. That is probably enough for British Basketball League for this week's pod. We can do it'd be an interesting one to come back to, I think, because as Sam mentioned, there is a bigger story to tell here, but maybe not do it in 10 minutes. And the reason we've only got 10 minutes is because I wanted to talk about the returning National Hockey League. Couple of things that I picked out as interesting on this, but you guys might have some different ideas. Utah Hockey Club make their debut in this year's NHL new season. They are, of course, owned by Ryan Smith, CEO of Qualtrics. He's built himself up quite a little portfolio of sports clubs. He's got an NHL team, he's got an NBA team, he's got an NWSL team, and an MLS team, I believe, in total, all centered around like Utah, obviously, where he's from. My sort of observation on this is, why is it a good time for someone like Ryan Smith to be buying into the NHL? Who wants to take that?
What was the relocation fee? I think it was like 200 million or something like that.
Yeah, so he took the Arizona Coyotes from Arizona and has relocated them to Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is like is a pretty good deal. I think his Ryan Smith had, I think it was a couple of years beforehand, had like basically held talks with NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman, and then kind of later on asked if he'd initiate an expansion process, because obviously the NHL has 32 teams at the moment. Didn't really have any plans to expand beyond that, but Ryan Smith wanted to bring a team to Utah. So then it kind of was quite an opportune moment, basically, because the owner of the Arizona Coyotes couldn't find a suitable home for them. So the NHL basically took that to Ryan Smith and said, well, do you want to buy the rights to this franchise basically and relocate it? So in the first instance, I say it's pretty good, a good deal. And they kind of haven't really faced some of the challenges that maybe a traditional expansion franchise would, in that they got a lot of the personnel that were part of the Coyotes franchise. As part of that deal, he's managed to sort of repurpose the Utah Jazz NBA venue so that it's fit to host hockey also. But if you just think a little bit more broadly in terms of why it's a good time to be getting in, the NHL is it's on upward trajectory at the moment. I suppose it's done quite a few things in recent years since the pandemic to kind of arrest maybe a little bit of stagnation, perhaps it could be said, to broaden its audience. You know, its viewership last year was up, so it's clearly kind of resonating in that sense. So with all those things kind of happening, you'd suggest that when its media rights deals come up in the next few years, and those are going to go up, and then franchise values are going to surge as well. So for Ryan Smith to get in kind of at the point that he did, and also to be able to bring a franchise to a town like Utah, which is a winter sports town, it's obviously hosted the Olympics before, is going to do so again in 2034. It's a pretty good time for him to be setting up an NHL franchise there, I think. Yeah,
that deal in particular was a bit of a snip when you could think about that the Ottawa Senators sold for nearly $1 billion, or around $1 billion. And then, yeah, Ed, as Sam mentioned, sort of generally tracking quite well. Was there anything else that you'd pick out as something to keep an eye on for the upcoming NHL season, or something that's really like grabbed your attention?
Yeah, just to add to Sam's point about sort of the metrics trending upwards. I mean, they had the record attendances. There was some impressive TV ratings. I think the average NHL franchise, I think it is now worth over $1 billion. I think that was for the first time last year. So it gives you an idea of where the metrics are going. I think probably worth keeping an eye on is in Canada, actually, because Amazon, they've agreed a 2-year deal to show NHL Monday Night Hockey in Canada. So, 2-year sub-licensing deal with Rogers Communications. Guess you could probably describe Amazon's broadcast strategy as sort of quite opportunistic and selective. So
I used to describe it as opportunistic and selective, and then they started just doing things like buying the NBA and buying the NFL. I think you're right in that it's still like that in Europe, but in North America, I think it's pretty obvious. It's kind of like, what's the biggest property? Can I buy it? And in Canada, it's gone, yes, it's gone, I can go get a package of the most popular sport in this country for a couple of years, test out if it's going to work, and then maybe in 2 years' time when that rights deal comes up, really go for it. Maybe this is sort of the tail end of that opportunistic approach. I sort of feel like this is the go make the biggest splash kind of approach.
Well, yeah, and they're going to hope that, well, Amazon, I should say, they're going to hope they can sort of turn Monday Night Hockey into, you know, that kind of must-watch television event the same way it has done for Thursday Night Football, you know, which is now a much more important component of the NFL schedule. And I guess the NHL will be hoping for the same when it prepares to take its Canadian broadcast rights to market. So if it becomes an important part of the league's inventory, it could attract a bidding war.
Yeah. The sort of unique quirk about the NHL is that it technically has its broadcast rights are worth similar amounts domestically and overseas, largely because of the Canadian contract is so large on its own.
I guess the other thing to keep an eye on is like player salaries. So yeah, basically their salary cap continues to rise. It's gone up to $83.5 million this season. It's going to be $88 million next season. And the reason that's worth keeping an eye on is because the basically collective bargaining agreement expires after the 25-26 campaign. So that's obviously always an interesting sticking point. There's always issues that kind of arise in the build up to that. And one of the things that happened during the off season was that Leon Draisaitl became the NHL's highest paid player, signed an 8-year contract extension with the Edmonton Oilers worth $112 million. Average annual value of that is the highest in NHL history. And I think his agent basically said that this is going to be the norm from now on. Basically going to be seeing more $100 million plus contracts in the league, which obviously kind of it puts the pressure on the league to keep kind of driving those revenues that we've been talking about, right? Especially when those media rights deals come up, continuing to grow that sponsorship revenue as well. So yeah, I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on, just kind of as collective bargaining agreement, as they tend to come up for renewal, you start to see sort of little stories appearing in the media about what both sides want. So that's maybe something that we'll see over the next 12 months.
The other thing to note on the NHL from my perspective is that it's more of a sort of slightly fiddly ownership thing, but it does relate a little bit to Amazon, is that arguably the biggest franchise, the most popular franchise in the NHL, Toronto Maple Leafs, have got a new owner, or a new sole owner, not a change in ownership as such, with Rogers buying out Bell's split share. But that comes at a time as well when Amazon is getting into that broadcast space in Canada. So with Rogers also being one of the broadcasters that pays that hefty rights fee, so this kind of offsets a little bit of that purchase and there's kind of little wrinkles all the way through the Canadian NHL, Amazon, Rogers, Bell narrative here. That's it's quite complicated. It's a very small North American family, but they seem to be figuring out the entry of a long lost or a newfound cousin, maybe. Okay, on that slightly awkward note, Sam, do you want to tell us a little bit about your interview with Tom Gargiulo from BodyArmor and why it's relevant in a NHL context?
Yeah. So yeah, Tom Gargiulo is the chief marketing officer at BodyArmor. They're basically about to start their first full season as an NHL sponsor after replacing BioSteel as the league's official sports drink partner ahead of last season's playoffs. We basically spoke about their plans for the partnership, why they chose the NHL and what it offers that other major leagues don't, as well as some of the company's kind of like broader growing pains since being acquired by Coca-Cola, and kind of how their new marketing strategy is going to help them dethrone Gatorade as the number one sports drink.
I love it. All right, sounds fascinating. Let's hear from Tom.
Tom, thanks very much for joining me. We've sort of spoken about BodyArmor, still a relatively new brand, also a very ambitious one, with a stated aim of becoming a number one sports drink in the US. Now, where do you think the company is in terms of, well, I guess we can kind of look at some industry figures and stuff in terms of where it isn't getting to that point, but from where you sit, where does it feel like where the company is tracking kind of in that journey at the moment?
Yeah, so part of that vision is actually, we are a two branded house within Coca-Cola Sports. So we have the benefit of having not only the BodyArmor brand, but also the Powerade brand. And we believe, having that 1-2 punch is really going to help us ultimately achieve that leadership position in the category. One side of the spectrum, we have Powerade, which is just a better version of a traditional sports drink. We have 50% more electrolytes than the lead brand. Our product, has unique assets that we're really proud of, like the NCAA March Madness, and we have 25 college and university partners and NIL deals that we're able to leverage. And also it's a fantastic product at a great value. For those who don't have the disposable income and who don't have, tons of money to drop on premium sports drinks, we're the brand for them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have BodyArmor, which is obviously a more premium product. But, the role of BodyArmor really is to continue to grow the category and to grow the boundaries of the category by bringing new health and wellness benefits to the sports drink category, but also to live in that kind of broader, functional, better for you space. So, because we have the strength of these two brands, we do fundamentally believe that we have the tools and resources in order to do that. Now, in terms of just, the trajectory and where we are, Powerade has been through a bit of a rebirth over the last year and a half, just in terms of new messaging, new formula, new bottle, new biz ID, everything. And the brand has really responded incredibly well. And right now it's the fastest growing brand in the category. BodyArmor, on the other hand, it's been a little bit of a challenge. And truth be told, a lot of it is just growing pains of being part of the Coca-Cola system and kind of learning how to operate. But also, I think we can't, underestimate the entrants that have came into the category and have really impacted our business, because they've essentially copycatted our product and played the same playbook. So we're in a position where we're kind of keeping our heads above water, fending off those entrants. And in the background, we are in the process of doing some pretty game-changing things with the brand that we're really excited about for 2025. So I honestly do believe that, while Powerade's on that trajectory, we're going to get BodyArmor on the same trajectory in the next 6 to 12 months.
It's interesting you mentioned, because as you allude to there, the sports drink market is very cluttered, as you'll know, and you compete not only with the established brands like Gatorade, for example, but then I feel like the sports drink category is something where, creators feel like they can add something, where athletes themselves feel like they can add something. Where we've seen, obviously Brian was one that kind of shot onto the scene. I think even here in the UK, it was like a collector's item for a little bit. And I almost liken a Prime box was like an NFT for a little bit, and so in the sense that the value was really high for a while, and then all of a sudden the demand just drops and the price went down massively as well. So it's kind of interesting from that perspective. So I guess just what sort of things are you trying to hone in on as BodyArmor that really differentiate you? Because as you've alluded to there, I think, obviously the kind of that healthier positioning is clearly one of them. Is that the thing that you really try to draw out in your marketing?
You kind of hit it. I mean, ultimately, this brand started with this amazing tagline, more than a sports drink, because it really was a sports drink that delivered much more, than the traditional category. Like I mentioned, vitamins and minerals, added electrolytes, healthier electrolytes, etc. We're really going to be leaning into that. And one of the key influences on our business was Kobe. So finding that kind of intersect between, the influence of Kobe and the Mamba mentality and that whole idea around what this brand was founded on, which was being more than a sports drink, is kind of the journey that we're going to take moving forward. So I wish I could share more about what we're doing, but I can tell you that the plans that we have in place for next year is honestly going to be the biggest impact to the brand since the launch itself.
I'm interested to know as well, because when you are sort of putting those kind of the healthier positioning and the vitamin stuff that you mentioned, sort of like front and center of the marketing, I'm interested to know sort of like, who you're trying to reach with that, I guess, because I guess to become number one in a market, you need to have that mass appeal as well, right? Beyond the sort of, I guess, elite athlete or maybe your elite amateur athlete. And if I'm just using myself as an example, I'll drink a sports drink after a run, definitely, because it helps, I guess, those electrolytes back into the system and that kind of thing. But I'll also, another time that I frequently have a sports drink is probably the morning after I've had a few drinks, to be perfectly honest, because it's also something that tastes good. It's something that makes me feel a little bit better, a little bit more refreshed. Is that kind of something you guys think about as well in terms of broadening that appeal, not just getting your product into people's hands when they're doing sport, but also getting your products into people's hands just when they kind of want something that tastes good as well? It might sound like a very sort of simplistic way of thinking about it, but it's kind of just something that
Oh, no. I think you hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, this brand is all about being the better option, and anybody looking for better option or looking to just get better, and even if it's small in their day-to-day lives, that's who we're really kind of talking to. And that's who we really think this brand is right for. But to your point, we've really kind of branched out beyond kind of the hardcore athlete into more mainstream lifestyle, through a lot of our social activations and through a lot of our partnerships. We brought Anita, the worldwide pop icon, and Olivia Culpo, who's a massive influencer here in the US. She's married to one of our other athletes, Christian McCaffrey, really to kind of broaden our appeal and to speak to different households and potential consumers. The other thing, too, that we're also focusing in on quite a bit moving forward is expecting mothers and new mothers as well. Believe it or not, a lot of our heaviest consumers actually first got exposure to this brand, either during pregnancy or the first few months of being a new mom, because, doctors continue to tell them that they need to hydrate in order to produce milk and breastfeed their newborn child. The challenge with traditional sports drinks is the amount of sodium that you would have to ingest in order to do that. So now we offer a solution for those new and expecting moms to, deliver significant electrolytes without necessarily having to go nuts with their sodium levels. So that's something that we're also really leaning into as well.
Sure. Let's sort of come on to sports specifically then, because obviously that's one way in particular that as a sports drink brand you're gonna stand out is through by being a sponsor of a major league like an MLS, for example. But obviously in April you were announced as the new sports drink partner of the National Hockey League. Obviously their previous deal in that category with BioSteel was obviously cut short because of BioSteel filing for bankruptcy. Was it kind of an opportunistic deal in that sense at all, or does it kind of just fit with where you want to go as a brand generally and fit with that broader marketing strategy?
Ultimately, I think there's so many different reasons why it just made sense for us. Starting with, it's obviously one of the core four sports leagues in the US and Canada as well. I would even argue it's probably the number one by a distance sport in Canada. Ultimately, it's one of the fastest growing leagues and one of the most exciting leagues in the sports industry here in the US. Viewership is up at an all-time high. The diversity in the sport is at an all-time high. The impact it's having in the youth space is at an all-time high. And there were just so many kind of intersects that just met a lot of our objectives and made sense for us. On top of which, just the media value alone of being on the sidelines and the exposure that we get in the game is a tremendous advantage for us.
What was interesting about, I guess, the diversity in the youth efforts that they're making in the NHL? What was sort of appealing about the fan base in particular, I suppose? Were there things that you saw for that where you thought, these are the people that we want to reach basically, and we can see them in the NHL fan base that exists today?
Yeah, one of the key insights about the NHL fan base is that there's very little overlap with the other sports leagues. So, for instance, if you go after the National Football League, there is a lot of overlap with Major League Baseball and the NBA. but the NHL is a very unique fan. The hockey community in general is just very unique in terms of the people that are part of it are obsessed with it. They're absolutely enamored with the sport, and the fanaticism is off the charts. So being able to kind of tap into that hockey culture, being part of that broader community, just opens up so much more potential and possibilities with us. And that's one of the reasons why we also partner with Connor McDavid, the sport's greatest star. I don't think it's necessarily a competition to say he's the best player in the world. And we're thrilled to have him on the roster.
Yeah, and obviously I know that your expansion into Canada kind of predated the announcement of the partnership, but now that partnership kind of is in place, how big a role will it play in sort of fueling that expansion in Canada, I suppose?
I mean, it's going to be huge. I mean, we initially partnered with Connor because we had a vested interest in Canada and we were launching in that market, and he's the biggest star in the country. But when the NHL opportunity kind of came up, we had to kind of jump at the opportunity, and the fact that now we have the two biggest assets in the sport, we're 100% committed. We have the league deal, but we also have club deals with 12 clubs within the league, which is about a third of the total population, and hopefully that'll grow over time. But that's been an amazing opportunity, and to see the results that we've received just in the 3 short months that we had during the NHL playoffs has been phenomenal. The fan reception, the exposure, the awareness levels have really spoken for themselves, and we're so excited to have the next season kick off in a month.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, we are speaking sort of a few weeks out from the NHL season now, and I guess I suppose you've maybe had a little bit more time to plan in terms of how you're going to activate around the partnership going into sort of the first full season. Can you kind of maybe shed a little bit of light into what you've got in store for that? Any kind of campaigns or specific areas that you're focusing on?
Yeah, the conversation with the NHL started in January, very preliminary, but didn't really heat up until probably the latter part of the month into February. And we eventually landed on a deal in April, and then started activating the playoffs immediately after that. So the feat that the team had to overcome in terms of not only getting the assets to the league, but also squirt bottles, coolers, product. I mean, all of these things we had to do in like a very short window, like 4 to 6 week window. We were able to turn it on, and we had a tremendous run in the playoffs. And you couldn't ask for a better playoff with a BodyArmor team in the Florida Panthers and then Connor McDavid's team in the Edmonton Oilers going to Game 7. It was tremendous. But, fast forward to now that we have the playoffs under our belt to learn and get some good, what to do and what not to do under our belt. The fact is now we have better equipment. We're able to, make sure that we're capitalizing on all the advertising opportunities and the exposure opportunities. We're able to actually activate around their jewel events like the Winter Classic, the Four Nation Face-Off, the Stadium Series, the Stanley Cup playoffs, etc. We're going to be heavily involved in all those platforms. In addition to some of their youth programs like NHL Street will be integrated into the NHL 2025 game for EA Sports, will be integrated in Roblox, the NHL experience within Roblox. There's so many great things that we're able to finally tap into that's going to blow this partnership to the next level.
Yeah, definitely. And you kind of alluded to a few things already in terms of, I suppose, just the media value of your products being on the sidelines and the visibility that generates, and I guess kind of the awareness. What's sort of the goal of these partnerships with NHL, with MLS? Is it kind of that awareness play? Is it about building brand equity? Is it about driving sales? Are those kind of the key ways that you measure it?
Yeah, I think especially for a brand like BodyArmor, it accomplishes a number of objectives. I think first and foremost, just having the credibility of professional athletes consuming your product at the moment of sweat. It's proof that our product actually delivers against what we say it delivers. The second, to your point, is all about awareness. We are in the number 2 position in the category by quite a distance. And, some of our brand health metrics aren't as strong as maybe our competitor, but this is an opportunity for us to draft off one of the fastest growing sports in North America and one of the fastest growing leagues in North America, and gives us the opportunity to activate and market, to get more product on store floors, and again to tap into a unique and incremental fan base that we wouldn't be able to through some of the other leagues and some of the other partners we have.
So I want to move on from kind of the league level partnerships to some of the athlete deals that you kind of spoke about a little bit earlier on. And it's kind of a bit of a strategy that a few brands use, right? Or sort of startup brands, I suppose, not the BodyArmor's necessarily a startup anymore, but when they're first making their way, the kind of part of the way those deals are structured is to give athletes that equity so they do have kind of a vested interest in its growth. How does that relationship kind of exist today now that the brand is a little bit more established? What role do those athlete partnerships play now? Do they have a say in things like product development, for example, as well? Or is it still purely about just kind of promoting the brand and leveraging their platforms and their audience as well?
Yeah, it's been a bit of an evolution, to be honest with you. I mean, we went from, being this independent company and all of our athletes having equity in the company. So, they were going above and beyond, their deal points, so walking down the tunnel, doing their fit walk with a bottle in hand, or putting a bottle on the podium after in a post-game press conference, having it in the background when they're posting pictures of them playing with their kids, stuff like that. And during the transition to Coca-Cola and eventually becoming part of a public company, our partnerships did transition into a more common, spokesperson agreement, kind of structure. What we've been working on over the last year and a half since I joined is finding ways for us to kind of get back to that equity model that we once had. Now, we can't obviously give them equity in the company anymore because, now we're wholly owned by Coca-Cola. And we're not in a position to offer them Coca-Cola stock as part of our deals as much as we would like to. But we're finding other unique ways in order to incentivize our athletes to really go beyond what the contract states and to feel like they do have a vested interest in our business and in our growth. So I can't share a ton of those details, but I can tell you that it's been a major unlock for us, not only with our partners, but also it gives us a competitive advantage in the marketplace.
Sure. And I guess on top of the athlete partnerships that you have, the sports league partnerships you have, I found it interesting that you've also been working with kind of content publishers as well, I suppose we call them, like obviously Barstool and also Dude Perfect, who I remember watching kind of, I don't know how long ago now, like 10, 15 years ago, just back when they were doing trick shots on the golf course and that kind of thing, and high-fiving, and this kind of thing has become a little bit more sophisticated than that now, and they've come to be massive, but with huge followings on their social platforms. I just kind of wanted to ask, how does the way that you collaborate with a Dude Perfect or with a Barstool differ to the way that you maybe work with a sports league? I imagine when you're working with a sports league, perhaps there's more maybe parameters in place in terms of what you can do, whereas maybe there's a little bit more scope to be creative with a creator like a Dude Perfect.
Yeah. I mean, for those two properties, Dude Perfect has over 100 million followers that we get to reach every single time that our product is included in their videos or in their social posts. And the same thing with Barstool Sports. They have over 500 million views a year. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous how many people they reach and how much exposure they're able to get to us. But, for us, we're not trying to infiltrate their content. We're not trying to, play the traditional play of just sponsoring this and that. These partnerships are truly, how do we integrate our product and our brand organically into their content so that they're telling the story of Body Armor through their lens, not necessarily the other way around. There's, I said in a meeting with Dude Perfect a couple of months ago, I said, there is two parties in this meeting. One has 100 million followers and the other, has 500,000 or whatever it was at the time. So we're going to take your lead in terms of, how to talk to your followers. And as a result, they've been heavily influencing, some of our innovation with the Dude Perfect LTO that we launched. Barstool has, executed some really creative ideas of integrating our brands in different events that they ran, like the Beer Olympics and things like that. That certainly helped with the after party. But it's been a lot of fun working with these properties and finding new and different ways of having our products integrate into their content and a lot of their really cool activations and events.
You mentioned there's 100, figures in the 100 millions in terms of their followers. And as you mentioned earlier, NHL viewership is really high at the moment. But in terms of the, I suppose, demographic that partnering with those publishers helps you to reach, does that kind of, I suppose that kind of differs from what you'd get through your league partnerships, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what I would say about the NHL is viewership is growing. And the great thing about their viewership, it's growing much younger. So, we are reaching kind of like a mass scale, through the property partnership. But what Dude and Barstool does, it really helps us tap into that younger, demographic. For Barstool specifically, generate Gen Z, and then Dude Perfect for kind of the younger Gen Z and maybe the older Gen Alpha generation. So it helps us put our brand in front of a lot of future drinkers, and hopefully convincing their parents that we're the right choice for the family.
Yeah, definitely. And how does that speak to the way that I suppose you maybe refocused a little bit in terms of what media channels you're thinking about when you're running campaigns? I suppose it can be tailored to different ones, right? But how are you sort of thinking about in terms of which is going to benefit you more, whether it's kind of traditional broadcast, whether it's digital media now, what you kind of feel like you're leaning towards more?
I think it's safe to say that traditional broadcast has lost a lot of equity and efficacy over the last few years just by how people consume media. And it's harder and harder for us to kind of, break through in that environment. But two areas that have absolutely grown and have strengthened over the years. One is, professional live sports, because it's something that people want to consume in the moment. They don't want to necessarily, watch the recap of the game afterwards. They want to know, they want to see the action in person. And then social media and digital content has absolutely taken off. So I think it's a way for us to be a part of those two different spaces in a very unique and ownable way by partnering with these guys. While broadcast media is still going to be part of our marketing mix and still going to be a big part of our plan, this gives us an opportunity to kind of diversify and also tap into, consumers, where they're kind of engaging with content and how they're consuming content very differently than they have in the past.
What's next for Body Armor? What's on the slate from your perspective within with the marketing division that you lead, I guess? Are we going to see more expansion? Are we going to see more partnerships, more bold campaigns?
We got a couple of things up our sleeves for the balance of this year. With the kickoff of the basketball season, I think we have a pretty exciting announcement that's going to be coming very soon. Not with the league, but with a partner that we're absolutely thrilled about. We'll be sharing that very soon. We also have, fall football is fully underway. So we have a tremendous campaign within Powerade focused around college football with Commitment Takes More. And we're also launching, some unique LTO bottles celebrating our football athletes that will be available, nationwide over the next few months that we're excited about. And then, of course, the NHL season kicking off next month and all the fanfare and all the excitement, driving that. But going into next year, what I will say is we're putting together some really special plans where we'll be able to kind of get back to our roots. That's going to, help us break through and hopefully get to that next level of growth that we're trying to achieve and put us on that trajectory of category leadership, like I mentioned before.
Sure. Awesome. And I'm going to put you on the spot for one last question, Tom, but who's your bet for the Stanley Cup this year?
Ooh, it's going to be tough. Unfortunately, I'm a huge Rangers fan.
Oh, there you go.
And, they're really on the cusp of breaking through. And I think this really is the year. They've added a lot of really exciting pieces. I think their offense is in a really great place. They have the best goalie in the league, in my opinion. So I'm going to go with the Rangers. I'm going to be the homer.
Okay, we'll jump on in a few months then, and we'll see if you're right. We'll look back on that prediction. But Tom, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been great talking to you, and really appreciate it.
Absolutely, thanks so much, Sam. I appreciate it.
Okay, gents, thank you very much for joining me on this week's pod. Before we go, a little reminder: Sports Pro now has a WhatsApp channel. You can find us by searching in the channels tab in WhatsApp. You just find join, and we'll be providing a regular stream of daily content on there for you to kind of get all of your sports industry news updates, that kind of thing. Very simple to find. I can't really give you any links or anything. It's literally just you search Sports Pro in WhatsApp. But yeah, Sam, Ed, thank you very much for joining me, and I'm sure I will be speaking to you again very soon.
Cheers, Tom.
Cheers, chat.